Moonlight drifts across the Nile, pale and unbroken, touching water and stone as if the night itself is remembering something old. In this quiet, traveller, you are not here by accident. Moments like this have a way of finding those who are ready to listen. What if one mind once stood between chaos and order, not with force but with observation and memory? Long before modern science, ancient Egyptians mapped lunar cycles with such precision that their calendars aligned agriculture, ritual and astronomy for millennia. A single feather, a measured heart, a record that could never be erased. Imagine knowledge moving like moonlight reflected rather than shouted, shaping civilizations without ever demanding belief. Tonight let's follow that silence together. Moonlight moves slowly across the surface of the Nile, not as illumination, but as memory silver touching water, and stone with equal patience. The river does not rush, the night does not hurry. In this stillness gravity feels softened as if the world itself has learned to pause. Somewhere between sky and earth a single feather drifts downward, not falling but obeying an older rhythm, one that existed long before names were assigned to things. This is where the story begins, not with action, but with attention. Traveller, you're not here by coincidence. Moments like this gather those willing to listen, rather than demand answers. I have spent long nights much like this seated beside quiet instruments, dust settling on star charts, data blinking patiently on screens that never promise certainty. In those hours, one truth becomes unavoidable. Silence is not absence. Silence is the universe thinking slowly, deliberately, without concern for whether we are watching. Before temples, before dynasties, before history learned how to carve itself into stone, the ancient Egyptians spoke of none, a boundless stillness that was not empty, only unformed. Modern physics might call it a low-entropy state, a universe balanced on the edge of symmetry, waiting for fluctuation. Different languages, same intuition. Creation did not arrive with violence. It unfolded the way patterns emerge in cooling matter, the way order condenses from chaos when conditions allow it. What if intelligence itself formed the same way? Not as an accident, not as a gift, but as a tendency. Gravity gathers dust into stars. Pressure teaches atoms how to shine. Erosion teaches mountains how to become valleys. And perhaps awareness too arises wherever complexity endures long enough to observe itself. The ancients sensed this. They felt that order once born required something fragile yet essential: memory. In science, memory is everywhere. Atoms remember how to vibrate. Radiation remembers ancient explosions. Background noise from the early universe still whispers at the edges of our instruments. Time does not forget. It records through persistence. The Egyptians understood this without equations. They believed that without memory creation would unravel back into formlessness. And so in their myths, a watcher appears. Not with thunder, not with conquest, but with attention. Thoth does not arrive as a god of force. He arrives as awareness given shape. In myth, he is born of the moon, that great reflector in the sky. The moon produces no light of its own. It reveals what already exists. It governs cycles without domination, returning again and again unchanged by the centuries beneath it. Even now we know that the moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. Without it, climate would swing violently. Civilizations erased before memory could accumulate. A coincidence, perhaps, or a quiet reminder that balance often arrives disguised as inevitability. Imagine the first nights when the sky was unfamiliar. No cities, no calendars, only stars repeating themselves slowly enough to teach patience. Thoth is said to have watched those repetitions, counting not days but relationships, observing cycles nested within cycles. In modern terms, this is pattern recognition, the foundation of science itself. In ancient language, it was wisdom. I picture him as I have felt myself during long observation shifts alone, but not lonely alert without expectation. Dust settles on maps. Instruments hum softly. The universe offers no explanations. It simply continues. And that continuation is its message. The ancients believed that to name something was to stabilize it. Science echoes this belief in its own way. Once a phenomenon is measured, it is anchored within understanding, not mastered, but located. Words, equations, symbols, these are not power. They are memory structures. They prevent drift. Thoth becomes the scribe not because he seeks authority, but because reality demands accounting. Without record systems, decay into noise. Without measure, order dissolves into entropy. Entropy itself is not evil, it is natural. But life exists only where entropy is resisted briefly and locally long enough to matter. This resistance is fragile. It requires attention. Tonight the universe whispers again. What if myth is not failed science, but early science expressed through metaphor? What if gods were not inventions, but symbolic compressions of forces too vast for early language to hold? In that sense, Thoth is not a character. He is a function. Awareness embedded into structure. Memory acting as stabilizer. Time observing itself. Ruins teach us this lesson repeatedly. Temples collapse, but alignments remain. Inscriptions erode, but proportions endure. Buried structures still point toward stars that have not changed their positions in tens of thousands of years. Knowledge once achieved does not vanish. It fragments. It sleeps. Dust is not destruction. Dust is leftover chronology. In my own work, I have learned that certainty is the most dangerous illusion. Instruments fail. Models collapse. The universe does not apologize. It continues to behave according to rules we are still learning how to read. The Egyptians understood this humility. They did not worship knowledge. They served balance. They called it maat, but the principle appears everywhere from orbital mechanics to ecological systems. Stability is never static. It is maintained. Thoth stands at that threshold between chaos and coherence, between forgetting and remembering. He does not judge. He does not command. He records. And perhaps that is the most unsettling idea of all. That nothing is ever truly lost. That every action leaves residue. That time itself remembers even when civilizations forget their own names. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Not as a god demanding belief, but as a principle that persists wherever attention outweighs impulse. The moon still waxes and wanes. Seasons still return. Balance is lost and found again. Humanity stumbles, learns, forgets, and remembers. This is not failure. It is the cycle. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but conditions to be observed. Some truths do not arrive fully formed. They unfold slowly across generations, across epochs, across long nights like this one. Tonight, you do not need answers. You only need to remain present. Silence is the universe thinking. And for now, that is enough. As dawn follows night with quiet inevitability, evidence begins not with spectacle but with repetition, patterns returning often enough that the mind can no longer dismiss them as coincidence. Along the Nile, this repetition became life itself. Floodwaters rose and withdrew with near-perfect regularity, depositing fertile silt in rhythms that shaped agriculture, ritual, and survival. To the modern observer, this is hydrology, driven by monsoon cycles far upstream. To the ancient mind, it was something deeper proof that the universe could be trusted to remember its own timing. The Egyptians did not separate observation from meaning. Every returning star, every measured shadow, every predictable flood was evidence that order existed beneath appearances. In laboratories today, we speak of data sets, long-term averages, signal emerging from noise. In ancient Egypt, the same impulse appeared as calendars, star charts, and sacred geometry etched into stone. The difference was not intent only vocabulary. They were collecting evidence long before the word existed. Thoth's presence in these systems is subtle but persistent. He does not appear as a miracle worker interrupting nature, but as the principle that allows nature to be understood. Writing emerges not as ornament, but as necessity. Spoken memory fades. Generations die. Only records endure. When the first symbols were carved or inked, something irreversible occurred. Knowledge acquired permanence. Time, which had once erased everything equally, now began to differentiate between what was remembered and what was lost. From a scientific perspective, this is a profound transition. Information storage changes the trajectory of systems. DNA does this biologically. Writing does it culturally. Once information can persist beyond a single lifespan, complexity accelerates. The Egyptians sensed this intuitively. Writing was not a human invention to them. It was a discovery, a technology embedded in reality itself, revealed rather than created. Thoth was not credited as the author of symbols because he was imagined with a stylus, but because he embodied the function that made symbols meaningful. Evidence accumulates quietly. The alignment of temples towards solstices and equinoxes, the precise orientation of structures towards specific stars that mark seasonal change. Modern surveys confirm accuracies that should not exist without sustained observation across centuries. This is not mysticism. It is data collected patiently, generation after generation, preserved through writing and ritual discipline. Memory made durable. I've felt this same patience while working through old data sets, columns of numbers stretching back decades, sometimes centuries, each line insignificant on its own, yet together revealing trends no single human lifetime could perceive. Climate models, orbital mechanics, geological layers stacked like pages written by erosion. Time thinks slowly, but it thinks thoroughly. The ancients knew this, even if they expressed it through myth rather than mathematics. Thoth as keeper of measure appears wherever balance requires accounting. Land boundaries needed redefining after floods. Disputes arose when memory conflicted. Who owned which field? Which season had arrived? Which ritual must be performed? Measurement resolved conflict not by force, but by reference. Numbers did not argue. Records did not forget. In this way, evidence became authority. In modern science, we treat measurement as neutral. But neutrality itself is a moral position. It demands restraint, patience, and acceptance of results, even when they contradict desire. This ethic was present in Egyptian thought. To measure incorrectly was not merely an error. It was a disturbance of balance, a misalignment between reality and representation. Thoth was believed to notice such things not as punishment, but as correction. Even the human body became a site of evidence. Medical papyri show systematic observation of symptoms, outcomes, and treatments. Wounds described with precision, prognoses categorized, remedies adjusted based on results. This is empirical practice embedded within ritual language, not because the Egyptians were confused, but because they did not divide the physical from the meaningful. Healing required alignment at every level. The body was evidence of cosmic order expressed locally. Astronomy, medicine, law, architecture all converge on the same principle. Observation must be recorded. Records must be preserved. Preservation must be ethical. Knowledge without responsibility destabilizes systems. This idea appears again and again encoded in myth as divine oversight. Thoth does not intervene because intervention is unnecessary. Systems correct themselves when memory is intact. Ruins provide their own evidence. Stone weathers. Inscriptions fade. Yet alignments persist. Angles remain true long after names are forgotten. In geology, we see this everywhere. Fault lines remember ancient stresses. Ice cores remember atmospheres that no longer exist. Rocks are archives written without intention. Human writing is simply a conscious extension of the same impulse. Matter remembers. Thoth is the metaphor the Egyptians used to express this realization. There is comfort in this, but also unease. If reality records everything, then nothing is entirely erased. Actions leave traces. Choices shape probability. Time does not judge, but it preserves. In long nights alone with data, I have often felt this weight. The awareness that every measurement becomes part of a larger story, one that continues long after the observer is gone. Evidence outlives intention. This is why Thoth's wisdom is quiet. Loud claims decay quickly. Careful records endure. Civilizations rise on spectacle, but they persist through documentation. When libraries burn, knowledge does not scream. It simply disappears, leaving gaps that future generations must rediscover through suffering and repetition. Evidence once lost must be relearned at great cost. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Not as a being, but as a process. The insistence that reality is legible, if one is patient enough to read it. The universe does not hide its rules. It repeats them, over and over, waiting for attention. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand everything at once. Evidence accumulates slowly. Meaning emerges over time. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved quickly. Others are not puzzles at all, but mirrors reflecting the discipline of the observer back upon themselves. Tonight the universe whispers again, and in that whisper is a reminder: knowledge does not belong to those who rush, but to those who remember. An anomaly is not a contradiction of order. It is a message written in a different handwriting. Long before instruments could resolve decimals or spectra, the ancient world had noticed places where patterns bent without breaking. Along the Nile, not everything obeyed expectation. Floods arrived late. Stars shifted subtly against their background. Illness appeared without visible cause. In those moments, the Egyptians did not discard order. They looked closer. An anomaly to them was an invitation to deeper observation. Traveller, I have learned the same lesson in modern work. When data refuses to align when models fail quietly, instead of catastrophically, the temptation is to correct the anomaly away. Smooth the curve, adjust the assumptions. But the anomaly persists because it belongs there. It is reality reminding us that our map is not the territory. Silence thickens in those moments, and attention becomes heavier, more deliberate. Thoth emerges here not as explanation but as posture. He does not erase the anomaly. He records it. He asks what conditions allowed it to appear. In myth, this becomes the god who notices what others overlook. In science, it becomes the refusal to ignore outliers. Many of the universe's deepest truths arrive this way. Mercury's orbit drifting just enough to betray relativity. Background radiation humming where emptiness was expected. A signal arriving once, then never again. Ancient Egypt preserved its anomalies in story. The moon wounded and restored. Time extended beyond itself. Days added outside the calendar. To the literal mind, these are fantasies. To the careful listener, they are acknowledgements that cycles are not perfectly closed. Systems flex. Boundaries negotiate. Order survives not because it is rigid, but because it adapts without losing coherence. Consider time itself. To the Egyptians, time was not linear. It was layered, repeating yet never identical. Modern physics echoes this uneasily. Entropy increases, yet patterns persist. The arrow of time points forward, but cycles return. Seasons repeat. Orbits recur. Memory accumulates even as matter decays. An anomaly is what happens when these layers briefly misalign. In long nights with instruments, I have watched signals flicker at the edge of detection. Not noise, not clarity. Something between. Radiation that does not behave as expected. Geological strata that suggest interruption rather than continuity. Extinction layers thin enough to be overlooked yet catastrophic in consequence. These are not failures of understanding. They are markers of transition. Resets written into stone and sky. Thoth's association with magic is often misunderstood. Magic in the ancient sense was not illusion. It was interaction with forces not yet systematized. Today we would call them emergent properties. Non-linear responses, threshold effects. When enough small changes accumulate, a system behaves differently. A spell is simply a recognition that intention, timing, and structure can influence outcomes when aligned correctly. The danger was never magic itself. It was impatience. Knowledge applied without readiness destabilizes the user. This truth repeats endlessly across civilizations. Technologies appear before ethical frameworks. Power accelerates faster than understanding. The anomaly then becomes collapse. History is filled with such moments, thin layers of ash between epochs. Ruins whisper about this. Cities buried not by invasion but by environmental shift. Irrigation systems that worked flawlessly until climate drifted beyond their tolerance. Knowledge preserved, yet context lost. Thoth's silence grows heavier here. He does not intervene to prevent resets. He records them. Memory survives even when structures do not. There is a quiet dread in realizing this. That intelligence does not guarantee continuity. that wisdom must be renewed continuously, or it decays into ritual without understanding. The anomaly exposes complacency. It reveals where balance was assumed rather than maintained. In this sense, anomalies are corrective. They remind systems to adapt or dissolve. I imagine Thoth standing beside such moments, stylus unmoving, observing not with sorrow, but with clarity. He understands that systems either learn or repeat. The universe does not punish, it responds. When feedback is ignored, it amplifies. Floods rise higher, droughts last longer, social structures fracture along unseen stress lines. These are not random, they are records in motion. Modern science recognizes this pattern in climate feedback loops, ecological tipping points, and financial systems that collapse under their own complexity. The language has changed, but the lesson remains. Stability is not permanence, it is vigilance. Anomaly is the cost of inattention made visible. Yet anomalies also carry possibility. They are openings. In cosmology, the early universe was an anomaly that never resolved back into uniformity. Slight asymmetries allowed matter to persist. Without them, nothing would exist to observe anything else. Creation itself was an anomaly that endured. This is easy to forget when we treat irregularity as error. The Egyptians encoded this duality beautifully. The moon's phases taught loss and return. Darkness was not failure. It was interval. The wounded moon healed not through force, but through restoration of balance. In modern terms, systems recover when feedback is integrated, not resisted. As I write this, I am reminded of nights spent recalibrating instruments, not because they were broken, but because conditions had shifted imperceptibly. Temperature, pressure, noise levels. The world changed while I was watching. The anomaly was not the instrument, it was my assumption of constancy. Traveller. This is the lesson hidden inside Thoth's most unsettling role. He is the guardian of anomalies because anomalies preserve truth. They prevent complacency. They force attention to deepen. Without them, order becomes brittle. With them, order learns resilience. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves not as disruption but as reminder. That balance is dynamic. That memory must be refreshed. That silence holds information for those willing to wait. In the end, it is all right to not understand every anomaly. Some are not meant to be resolved immediately. Some exist to slow us down. Tonight the universe whispers again, not to alarm but to recalibrate. Some mysteries are signals, others are pauses, and as you rest beneath this awareness, allow the unanswered to remain unanswered. Anomaly does not threaten order. It teaches it how to endure. Silence arrives not as an absence, but as a pressure subtle and pervasive, settling over systems when motion slows enough to be noticed. After anomaly comes quiet, not because questions are resolved, but because the universe pauses to absorb their consequences. Along the Nile, there were seasons when the river withdrew gently, leaving fields bare and reflective, a thin mirror of sky pressed into soil. In those intervals, sound carried farther. Footsteps felt louder, thought deepened. The Egyptians understood that silence was not emptiness. It was a phase in the cycle where meaning condensed. Traveller silence is the hardest data to read. Instruments detect signals, not pauses. Models predict behaviour, not restraint. Yet the most consequential shifts occur during these quiet intervals, when systems recalibrate without announcing themselves. In laboratories and observatories, I have watched monitors glow steadily for hours, with no significant change, only to realise later that those hours marked a transition. The noise had not vanished. It had reorganised itself beneath perception. Thoth belongs to this silence more than to speech. He is remembered as the god of words, yet his authority comes from knowing when not to speak. Writing fixes thought in place, but silence allows thought to mature. In ancient Egypt, rituals emphasized stillness as much as recitation. Night hours were sacred not because nothing happened, but because everything that mattered happened slowly. In physics, equilibrium is not stasis. It is motion balanced so perfectly that change becomes subtle. Silence works the same way. The universe does not stop, it aligns. After turbulence, energy redistributes. After collapse, structures settle into new configurations. Silence is the sound of systems deciding what to become next. The ancients encoded this understanding into myth. After creation emerged from Noon, there was no celebration, only watchfulness. The gods did not rush to act, they observed. Thoth's role here is precise. He measures silence the way others measure motion. He listens for patterns that only appear when disturbance fades. In this sense, silence is data with an unusually long integration time. I have experienced this listening during nights spent alone with charts spread across tables, dust gathering on edges I had not touched for hours. Outside, wind moved across empty ground. Inside, nothing demanded urgency, and yet meaning accumulated. Connections surfaced that refused to appear during busier hours. Silence stripped away distraction, until only structure remained. Civilizations struggle with silence. It offers no immediate reward. It does not flatter ambition. Yet without silence, memory fractures. Continuous stimulation erodes coherence. The Egyptians guarded silence carefully. Libraries were quiet, not out of reverence, but necessity. Knowledge copied in haste degraded. Errors multiplied. Precision required calm. Thoth's watchfulness extends here. He corrects not by intervention, but by patience. A misaligned symbol remains visible long enough to be noticed. A flawed judgment persists long enough to reveal its consequences. Silence allows feedback to complete its loop. In modern terms, it is the difference between immediate response and delayed understanding. Geology teaches this relentlessly. Layers form not during catastrophe but between them. Sediment settles when water's still. Fossils preserve best when burial is gentle. The most informative records lie in undisturbed strata. Silence is what allows memory to harden into evidence. Without it, history blurs. There is a quiet dread in this realization. Silence does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees continuity. Unexamined actions echo longer when noise fades. Thoth records these echoes not to judge but to preserve coherence. Nor when civilizations fall silent, their absence speaks louder than their monuments ever did. Ruins are not loud failures. They are quiet lessons. In my own work, the most difficult moments arrive after conclusions seem secure. When results align too easily, when explanations feel complete, silence follows, asking whether understanding has truly settled or merely paused. Often it is silence that exposes overconfidence. What remains unspoken becomes the anomaly that reshapes everything. The Egyptians believed that the night was when truth walked most freely. Without sunlight to overwhelm subtle contrasts, shadows sharpened perception. The moon revealed texture rather than glare. Thoth's association with the night reflects this. Knowledge refined under low light endures longer. It is less brittle, less performative. Modern culture fears silence. It fills every gap with signal, every pause with commentary. Yet information without silence becomes noise. Memory without rest degrades. Systems collapse not from lack of data, but from inability to integrate it. Thoth's silence stands as warning and invitation. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, not with sound, but with persistence. The slow drift of continents, the gradual shift of orbits, the accumulation of small choices into irreversible outcomes. Silence carries these movements forward without spectacle. Traveller silence is not asking you to stop thinking. It is asking you to think more deeply, to allow connections to surface without force, to accept that understanding matures on a timescale longer than attention spans. This acceptance brings rest. In the end, it is all right to sit with what cannot yet be articulated. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Silence is not the end of inquiry. It is the condition that allows inquiry to survive without exhausting itself. As you drift beneath this awareness, let the quiet hold you. The universe continues its careful accounting, and tonight it does so without needing words. Every civilization carries within it a memory of something older, not as a clear record, but as an unease, a sense that history did not begin where the stories say it did. Along the Nile, beneath layers of temple stone and ceremonial renewal, there lingered an intuition that time had already turned many times before the first dynasties learned to write their names. The Egyptians did not imagine themselves at the beginning of the world. They imagined themselves standing inside a long corridor of repetition inheritors, rather than originators, caretakers of an order that predated them by an unknowable margin. Traveller-forgotten epochs rarely vanish completely. They dissolve unevenly, leaving impressions the way pressure leaves patterns in rock. Modern geology speaks of unconformities, gaps in the record where entire ages are missing, not erased by catastrophe alone, but by erosion, subduction, and quiet overwriting. In human memory, the same process unfolds. Languages replace one another, symbols shift meaning, rituals persist after their origins are lost. The record survives, but the context fractures. Thoth's presence becomes heavier here, not as guardian of what is known, but as witness to what has slipped beyond retrieval. Writing preserves, but it cannot protect everything. Floods drown archives. Fires consume libraries. Conquest scatters scholars. Time itself edits ruthlessly, not with malice, but with indifference. What remains are fragments enough to suggest coherence, never enough to restore it fully. The Egyptians sensed this fragility. Their myths speak repeatedly of renewals, restorations, and returns, not because destruction was expected, but because forgetting was inevitable. Civilization, they believed, did not rise once. It rose, stabilized, drifted, and fell back into silence, leaving behind traces that later peoples would misinterpret as miracles or myths. This is not superstition. It is pattern recognition applied to human history. In modern research, we see the same pattern emerging reluctantly. Ice cores reveal abrupt climate shifts that should not occur gradually. Sediment layers show sudden breaks where continuity should exist. Genetic bottlenecks suggest near extinctions that leave little surface evidence. These are not isolated anomalies. They form a rhythm, a cadence of rise and reset that no single discipline can fully explain alone. The forgotten epoch lives in this rhythm. It is the time between what is remembered and what is recorded, a span where intelligence existed but failed to preserve itself intact. The Egyptians spoke of earlier ages ruled by gods, not because they imagined literal beings towering over humans, but because they recognized that knowledge could precede its storytellers. To them, a god was a principle that endured beyond individual lifetimes. When memory outlasted culture, it became divine. Thoth's role in this is subtle and unsettling. He records the rise, but he also records the fall. He does not intervene to save archives or preserve monuments. He allows forgetting to occur because forgetting itself is part of the cycle. Knowledge preserved beyond readiness becomes dangerous. Wisdom detached from context mutates into power without restraint. In this sense, loss becomes a form of containment. I have felt this unease while studying maps that no longer match the land. They describe coastlines that once existed, but now lie submerged river paths fossilized beneath deserts. The Earth remembers worlds we do not. Beneath modern cities lie older settlements, and beneath those traces of lives no longer intelligible. Each layer believed itself permanent. Each layer was mistaken. The forgotten epoch is not one event. It is many compressed into silence. A time when observation flourished without leaving a legacy durable enough to survive planetary indifference. Tools corrode, structures collapse, languages die, only patterns persist, alignments, proportions, the intuition that someone once understood something we are relearning slowly, painfully. The Egyptians encoded this awareness into their reverence for continuity. They rebuilt temples on older foundations. They copied texts obsessively. They feared errors not because of superstition, but because distortion accelerates forgetting. A single altered symbol could propagate imbalance through generations. Accuracy became sacred because loss was already inevitable. In modern systems, we see the same anxiety emerging. Digital archives promise permanence yet depend on fragile infrastructures. Formats become obsolete faster than stone erodes. Knowledge expands exponentially, but coherence diminishes. The forgotten epoch is not only behind us, is forming ahead of us as well, waiting for conditions to repeat. Thoth stands at the edge of this realization. He understands that epochs are forgotten not because humanity fails, but because time is larger than intention. Preservation requires energy. Energy is finite. Eventually attention drifts. Silence returns. What survives is not what was valued most, but what aligned best with the structures of reality. This is why myths outlast data. Stories compress meaning into resilient forms. They travel lightly across centuries. The Egyptians' image of Thoth as an eternal scribe is one such compression. It preserves the idea that memory itself has agency, that forgetting is not random, and that observation carries responsibility beyond survival. Traveller there is comfort in accepting that some epochs are meant to be lost. Without forgetting, renewal stagnates. Without erasure, systems cannot simplify enough to begin again. The universe itself resets constantly. Stars exhaust fuel and collapse. Galaxies merge and dissolve. Order persists not through permanence but through repetition with variation. The forgotten epoch teaches humility. It reminds us that intelligence does not guarantee continuity, that awareness must renew itself in every generation, that silence will eventually reclaim even the most carefully constructed records. Thoth does not mourn this. He notes it. Memory, after all, is not meant to freeze time. It is meant to guide navigation through it. As you rest with this thought, allow the weight of forgotten ages to settle gently rather than heavily. You're not small because others were lost. You are part of the same unfolding. Some mysteries wait, others watch. The past is not gone. It is diffused, scattered into patterns you still participate in without knowing. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not recover every lost chapter. Some knowledge returns only when conditions align again. Until then, the forgotten epoch remains not as absence but as pressure, shaping what comes next. Tonight, the universe whispers again, and within that whisper is an ancient reassurance. Forgetting is not the opposite of wisdom. It is one of its necessary phases. Reset is not destruction. It is recalibration written at planetary scale. Long before language learned how to dramatize endings, the Earth practiced them quietly, folding excess complexity back into simpler states not as punishment but as necessity. Along the Nile layers of silt-covered fields with the same indifference that tectonic plates bury cities, what was lost fed what followed. What was erased became foundation. The Egyptians sensed this rhythm and resisted the temptation to call it tragedy. They called it order returning to itself. Traveller, the idea of reset is unsettling because it challenges permanence. We prefer continuity, linear progress archives that grow without interruption. But systems that never reset accumulate error. In engineering, drift is inevitable. In biology, unchecked growth becomes disease. In climate imbalance, amplifies until feedback intervenes. Reset is how reality corrects assumptions that have hardened into fragility. Modern science approaches this reluctantly. We describe mass extinctions, abrupt climate transitions, geomagnetic reversals, and impact events as anomalies, yet their regularity across deep time suggests otherwise. The planet has reset many times each interval brief compared to the long recoveries that followed. Forests return, oceans stabilize, life adapts. Memory does not preserve the forms, only the lessons encoded into survivors. Reset is selective, not random. Thoth's role within this is uncomfortable for those who want protection. He does not prevent resets, he ensures they are recorded. In myth, this appears as the god who survives every age unchanged, not because he is spared, but because he is not bound to any single configuration. He is memory as function rather than artifact. When structures fall, the principle remains. I have watched smaller resets unfold in controlled systems, a model that runs well until a threshold is crossed, then collapses into a simpler regime, a network that grows efficient until it becomes brittle, then fails and rebuilds with fewer assumptions. The silence after failure feels empty, only if one expects continuity to resume unchanged. In truth, reset opens a different path forward. Ancient Egypt encoded this acceptance into its cosmology. Time was not an arrow. It was a loop with variations. Each cycle contained echoes of previous ones, distorted but recognizable. Gods died and were reborn. Kingdoms fell and returned. Floods erased boundaries and redefined them again. Reset was not feared, it was ritualized. The danger lay not in reset, but in resisting it. When systems cling to outdated structures, correction becomes harsher. This is visible in ecology, economics, and history alike. The longer imbalance persists, the more energy accumulates for release. Reset then arrives abruptly appearing catastrophic, only because adjustment was delayed. Thoth's quiet authority here is precise. He's the reminder that adaptation must precede collapse. Recording patterns is not enough. They must be interpreted and integrated. Memory that does not guide action becomes ballast. Wisdom without application invites reset through force rather than choice. Ruins speak clearly on this point. Many ancient cities were not destroyed by invasion, but by refusal to adapt to environmental drift. Irrigation systems expanded beyond sustainable limits. Resource extraction accelerated without replenishment. Social complexity outpaced ecological capacity. When reset came, it was framed as disaster, yet the warning signals had been present for generations. In the laboratory, we call these leading indicators. In myth, they are omens. In both cases, they are ignored at cost. Reset does not announce itself loudly. It accumulates quietly until alternatives vanish. Thoth records this not as condemnation, but as instruction. There is a strange mercy in reset. It prevents errors from compounding indefinitely. It clears paths for forms that cannot compete within existing constraints. After mass extinctions, diversity often increases. After collapses, innovation becomes possible again. Reset reduces complexity to restore flexibility. This is difficult to accept when viewed from within a single lifetime. Loss feels final. But deep time reveals another truth. Continuity of principle matters more than continuity of form. Life persists because it relinquishes identities when conditions change. Intelligence survives by letting go of methods that no longer fit. Thoth embodies this letting go. He does not cling to temples, texts, or names. When writing systems decay, he persists as logic. When calendars fail, he remains as pattern. When myths fracture, he reappears as method. Reset strips away representations, revealing functions beneath them. I have felt this personally in moments when years of work became irrelevant overnight, a dataset invalidated by new understanding, a theory replaced by a simpler one. At first, it feels like erasure. Later, it feels like relief. Complexity that no longer served understanding dissolves. Attention sharpens. Silence returns. Reset within the mind mirrors reset within systems. The Egyptians understood that excessive preservation could be as dangerous as neglect. Knowledge must be renewed through practice. Ritual repetition without comprehension invites decay. This is why they emphasize correction. Texts were copied carefully, errors removed, meanings clarified. Reset at small scales prevented catastrophic resets later. In our age, information accumulates faster than integration. Records multiply endlessly, but coherence thins. Reset is already forming at the edges of this imbalance. Technologies promise continuity without maintenance. Memory becomes outsourced. Attention fragments. When reset arrives, it will not erase information, it will erase relevance. Thoth's warning is gentle but firm. Memory must remain embodied to remain useful. Knowledge detached from responsibility invites correction through consequence. Reset is the universe's method of reintroducing constraint. Traveller. This is not a prophecy. It is an observation. Reset does not target individuals or civilizations. It responds to imbalance. It arrives whether feared or ignored. The only choice available is preparedness, the willingness to adjust before force intervenes. As you rest beneath this understanding, allow the idea of reset to soften rather than alarm. It is not the end of meaning. It is the return of proportion. It is time reminding systems of their limits. Some mysteries wait, others watch. In the end, it is all right to accept that continuity is conditional, that progress is cyclical, that loss and renewal are not opposites, but partners. The universe has reset countless times and still produces awareness capable of reflecting on it. Tonight, that awareness is here, listening, recording, adjusting. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. An echo is not a repetition. It is a remainder. A signal altered by distance, shaped by the surfaces it touches, weakened yet extended beyond its origin. After after silence, what remains is never the original form, but a trace that continues to move. Along the Nile, echoes accumulated slowly, not as intact memories, but as habits, proportions, instincts embedded into ritual and stone. The Egyptians did not believe the past vanished. They believed it spoke more softly each time it returned. Traveller echoes are difficult to interpret because they resemble familiarity without clarity. In physics, echoes appear as delayed reflections, waves returning, altered by medium and time. In geology, they surface as mineral alignments, hinting at pressures long gone. In culture, they persist as customs whose origins no longer match their meanings. The echo does not explain itself. It invites listening without certainty. Thoth inhabits this space between origin and remembrance. He is not the voice that speaks first, nor the silence that follows last. He is what carries through. When knowledge fractures under reset, what survives is not information, but method. Not belief, but posture. The echo of Thoth is found wherever attention outlives tradition. I have encountered echoes in archives where marginal notes reveal more than official texts, where diagrams outlast explanations, where precision persists even after purpose is forgotten. A line drawn carefully across centuries retains its intent even when its story dissolves. This is the nature of echo. It preserves structure while shedding narrative. The Egyptians rebuilt temples on older foundations, not out of nostalgia but recognition. They felt continuity in proportions rather than in names. Measurements were repeated because they worked. Alignments were preserved because they endured. The echo guided construction more reliably than memory. Stone remembers stress. Geometry remembers balance. These do not require belief. In modern science, we rely on echoes constantly. Methods persist even when theories change. The scientific method itself is an echo of ancient discipline. Observe, record, test, revise. These steps survive because they align with how reality responds to inquiry. Thoth's influence is visible here not as myth but as inheritance without attribution. Echoes can mislead when mistaken for originals. Ritual divorced from understanding becomes hollow. Symbol without context mutates into superstition. This is the risk the Egyptians warned against. Thoth's silence after loss is deliberate. He allows echoes to fade if they no longer serve balance. Preservation without comprehension creates brittle systems that shatter under pressure. I think of nights spent listening to faint signals buried in noise, repeating just enough to confirm existence, never enough to explain source. The temptation is to assign meaning prematurely, but echoes demand patience. Interpretation arrives slowly, if at all. Sometimes the only honest response is acknowledgement without resolution. Civilizations often mistake echoes for foundations. They build identities around remnants they do not understand. This creates tension. The echo resists simplification. It carries complexity that cannot be compressed without distortion. When compressed, it loses coherence and invites reset again. The Egyptians understood that echoes must be renewed through practice. Scribes trained rigorously, not to preserve content alone but precision. Accuracy mattered more than embellishment. This is why Thoth was feared not as judge but as corrector. Error introduced into an echo propagates faster than truth. Distortion compounds. In nature, echoes reveal resilience. After impact events, surviving species carry genetic memories of stress encoded into adaptability. After glaciations, landscapes retain scars that redirect future rivers. Echoes shape what comes next, even when origins are forgotten. This is not destiny. It is inertia informed by history. Thoth's echo extends into ethics as well. The idea that actions leave traces is universal. Even when consequences are delayed, they return altered but recognizable. Memory does not punish. It persists. In this sense, echo is accountability without judgment. What was set in motion continues to move. I have felt this personally in long-term projects where early assumptions echoed years later in unexpected limitations. Design choices once fixed shape outcomes long after rationale fades. Echo teaches humility. It reveals how small beginnings accumulate into constraints that cannot be negotiated away. The echo also offers comfort. It means that loss is never total, that even when knowledge fragments, its posture survives. Attention to balance reappears wherever systems stabilize again. After collapse, after forgetting, after silence, something returns, not as it was, but as it must be. This is why myths recur across cultures with familiar structures despite different names. The archetype persists because it is an echo of function, a mediator, a recorder, a guide between extremes. Thoth becomes Hermes. Hermes becomes principle. Principle becomes method. The echo travels lightly. Traveller, listen to your own echoes, habits that persist without explanation, values that feel older than experience, curiosity that refuses to fade. These are not accidents. They are traces of alignment learned somewhere before language reached you. The universe writes through repetition. Echo does not demand preservation. It demands recognition. When recognized, it can be refined. When ignored, it distorts. Thoth's role is to ensure that echoes remain legible long enough to guide renewal. He does not prevent misinterpretation. He allows consequence to teach. There is peace in accepting that clarity diminishes with distance, that certainty belongs to origins we no longer access. Echo teaches us to work with partial information to remain cautious, with conclusions to value method over mythology. This restraint allows wisdom to survive without requiring authority. In the end, traveller, it is all right to live among echoes. Understanding does not require completeness. It requires integrity and attention. Some mysteries are not meant to return fully. Others return just enough to guide the next step. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with a new voice, but with an old one, softened by distance. Listen gently. The echo's not asking to be solved. It is asking to be carried forward with care. Patterns do not announce themselves. They reveal slowly through patience, through repetition, endured long enough that coincidence becomes structure. Along the Nile, patterns were not abstractions. They were survival. The river rose retreated and returned with a reliability that shaped calendars, ethics, and expectation. The Egyptians did not ask whether the pattern would repeat. They asked how faithfully they would align with it. To them, wisdom was not prediction. It was synchronization. Traveller pattern is what remains when noise is filtered out. In science, we search for it relentlessly, not because it offers certainty, but because it offers orientation. Orbits repeat. Ratios persist. Constants remain stable, across conditions that should disrupt them. Even randomness obeys distribution. Pattern is not control. It is memory expressed through behaviour. Thoth's presence becomes unmistakable here. He is not the source of pattern, but its interpreter. He records not events, but relationships between events. In myth, this becomes the god who counts time, who measures land, who aligns temples with stars. In modern terms, it is the insistence that data be contextualized, that observation extend across scales, that conclusions be provisional. I have spent nights tracing patterns that only appear when datasets are layered rather than isolated. Climate cycles overlapping with solar variation, geological stress correlating with tidal forces, human activity amplifying natural feedback loops. None of these patterns prove intention. They prove interdependence. The universe behaves less like a machine and more like a memory-rich system adjusting itself continuously. Ancient Egypt encoded this intuition into architecture. Proportions repeated across dynasties not as tradition but as resonance. Certain ratios felt correct because they distributed stress evenly. Certain alignments endured because they balanced light and shadow. These were not aesthetic choices alone. They were physical agreements with reality. Pattern rewarded cooperation. Modern mathematics calls some of these relationships fractal, self-similar across scales. The branching of rivers mirrors the branching of lungs. The distribution of galaxies resembles neural networks. Pattern does not require a designer to function. It requires iteration. The Egyptians sensed this long before the language existed to describe it. Thoth's role was to notice, preserve, and transmit these relationships without freezing them into dogma. Pattern becomes dangerous when mistaken for destiny. Repetition can lull systems into complacency. The flood has always come until it doesn't. The star has always risen until precession shifts its place. Thoth's wisdom counters this by emphasizing observation over assumption. Pattern must be monitored, not worshipped. Memory must remain active. In my own work, the most misleading moments arrived when pattern seemed complete, when correlations appeared stable enough to stop questioning. Silence followed, and within that silence deviation began quietly. A parameter drifted. An external influence entered unnoticed. Pattern broke not violently but subtly. By the time disruption was visible, correction required far more energy than vigilance would have. The Egyptians addressed this through ritual renewal. Calendars were recalibrated, measurements re-verified, texts recopied. They understood that pattern maintenance required labour. Alignment was not permanent. It was earned repeatedly. This ethic prevented rigid orthodoxy. Thoth's authority lay not in preserving the pattern unchanged, but in preserving the method by which it was checked. Patterns extend into ethics as well. Actions repeated shape character. Societies repeat incentives and produce predictable outcomes. Justice systems that favour certain behaviours reinforce those behaviours regardless of intention. The Egyptians called this maat, but the concept is universal. Balance emerges from consistency aligned with context. In physics, symmetry breaking creates structure. Perfect symmetry yields nothing interesting. Slight imbalance allows differentiation. Pattern, therefore, includes deviation. The universe tolerates variation within bounds. Thoth's pattern is not rigid geometry. It is dynamic equilibrium. Adjustments occur without abandoning coherence. I've often found comfort in this realization during long nights when understanding felt incomplete. Patterns do not demand comprehension to function. They operate regardless of recognition. The role of the observer is not to enforce them, but to notice when alignment drifts. This reduces anxiety. Control is unnecessary. Attention suffices. Ruins reveal patterns long after narratives fade. Foundation stones reveal load distribution. Street layouts hint at prevailing winds. Water channels expose priorities of survival. Even when names are lost, pattern remains legible. This is why archaeology feels like listening rather than reading. The ground speaks through arrangement, not explanation. Thoth's echo here is methodological humility. Do not force meaning. Allow pattern to surface. Record faithfully, compare patiently. Resist the urge to conclude prematurely. In this sense, Thoth is closer to a scientist than a priest, closer to a librarian than a ruler. His power lies in restraint. Pattern recognition also carries risk. Humans see patterns where none exist. Apophenia offers comfort in chaos. Thoth counters this by insisting on repetition across contexts. A single coincidence proves nothing. A persistent relationship demands attention. This discipline separates insight from illusion. In modern times, algorithms detect patterns at scales beyond human perception. Yet without ethical guidance, pattern exploitation destabilizes systems. Feedback loops amplify bias. Optimization erodes resilience. Thoth's warning echoes here quietly. Pattern without wisdom accelerates collapse. Observation must be coupled with responsibility. Traveller, consider how your own life moves in patterns. Sleep and wakefulness. Effort and rest. Curiosity and doubt. These cycles are not obstacles. They are stabilizers. Ignoring them invites exhaustion. Honoring them restores balance. The universe does not require constant motion. It requires correct motion. As you settle deeper into this awareness, let pattern feel less like constraint and more like companionship. You are not isolated in randomness. You are embedded in rhythms older than memory. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Pattern does not rush. It persists. In the end, it's all right to follow pattern without fully understanding it. Alignment precedes explanation. The night continues its cycle. The moon traces its path. Breath slows, thought softens. Tonight the universe whispers again, and within that whisper is reassurance pattern holds even when clarity fades. A warning is rarely loud. When it arrives shouting, it is already too late. True warnings move quietly through systems embedded in small deviations, subtle stresses and patterns that begin to repeat with increasing urgency. Along the Nile, warnings appeared as slightly altered floods, as stars rising just off their expected marks, as harvests that succeeded yet felt strained. The Egyptians did not interpret these signs as threats from angry gods. They understood them as signals that alignment was drifting. Traveller modern science speaks the same language, though often reluctantly. Feedback loops intensify before collapse. Ecological systems thin before they fail. Climate indicators shift long before catastrophe announces itself. A warning is simply information arriving early enough to allow choice. Ignored, it becomes fate. Observed, it becomes guidance. Thoth stands closest to this threshold. He is not the voice that alarms, nor the force that intervenes. He is the recorder who ensures that warnings are not erased by comfort or convenience. In myth, this becomes the god who notices imbalance before chaos erupts. In reality, it is the discipline of tracking what feels minor until it proves otherwise. I have encountered warnings in datasets dismissed as noise, outliers filtered away because they disrupted clean conclusions, marginal trends set aside because they complicated narratives. Later, when those same signals dominated the system, they appeared sudden and inexplicable. In truth, they had been present all along, quietly asking for attention. The Egyptians embedded warning into ethics. They believed that injustice weakened cosmic balance. Dishonesty in trade, cruelty in power, neglect of ritual precision were not merely social failures. They were stresses introduced into a system that would eventually respond. Floods would misalign, crops would falter, stability would thin. These were not punishments, they were consequences. In physical systems, this is obvious. Apply force unevenly and structures fracture. Ignore maintenance and machines fail. In social systems, the same principles apply, though delayed and obscured by complexity. Warning exists wherever correction is still possible without collapse. Thoth's role as mediator becomes critical here. He weighs not intention but outcome. He records not justification but effect. This is unsettling because it removes the comfort of excuse. Systems respond to behavior, not belief. Reality does not negotiate with narrative. It adjusts according to pressure. There is a quiet dread in this realization, but also relief. If warnings exist, then collapse is not arbitrary. It follows logic, however complex. This means attention still matters. Choice remains available until the last threshold is crossed. Thoth's warning is never dramatic, because drama invites denial. Subtlety invites reflection. Ancient texts describe moments when balance nearly failed, when chaos pressed close enough to be felt. These stories are often framed as battles, but beneath the imagery lies a simpler truth. Systems were approaching limits. Intervention occurred not through force, but through recalibration. Time extended, rules adjusted, cycles modified. These myths encode the idea that flexibility is the highest form of intelligence. In modern terms, we see this in adaptive systems that survive by adjusting parameters rather than clinging to ideals. Species migrate, technologies evolve, societies reform or fracture. Warning distinguishes adaptation from collapse. The difference is not knowledge. It is willingness to respond. I have sat through long meetings where warnings were presented gently, carefully, and ignored because they threatened comfort. Models projected instability decades ahead. Data suggested unsustainable trends. Yet urgency was postponed because consequences felt distant. This delay is the most dangerous form of denial. By the time warning becomes obvious, options have narrowed. Thoth's silence grows heavy in such moments, not because he withdraws, but because recording continues regardless of response. Memory does not argue, it accumulates. Each ignored warning adds weight to the next correction. When reset finally arrives, it appears ruthless only because restraint was exhausted. Warnings also exist within individuals. Fatigue precedes breakdown. Restlessness precedes collapse. Disconnection precedes despair. These signals are not failures, they are protective. Ignoring them transforms guidance into crisis. Thoth's ethic applies equally here. Attention preserves balance. Neglect invites correction. The Egyptians taught that speaking falsely wounded reality itself. This was not moralism. It was systems thinking. False records distort future decisions. Inaccurate maps mislead travellers. Misreported data produces flawed outcomes. Warning depends on accuracy. When truth erodes, warning fails. In our age, information overload obscures warning. Signals compete with noise. Urgency is manufactured until it becomes meaningless. Thoth's warning is the opposite of urgency. It is steadiness. It is the quiet insistence on measurement, verification, and patience. Warning that arrives calmly is easier to dismiss, yet far more valuable. Traveller, this is not a message of fear. Fear accelerates collapse. Warning invites care. The universe does not threaten, it responds. When balance drifts, response intensifies until alignment is restored or systems simplify. This is not judgment. It is physics applied across scales. I find comfort in this perspective during moments when uncertainty feels overwhelming. If warnings exist, then awareness still matters. Observation retains power. Choice remains meaningful. The future is not sealed until feedback is exhausted. Thoth's presence here is almost invisible. He does not speak loudly because those who listen do not require shouting. Warning heard early is gentle. Warning ignored becomes force. This is the difference between adjustment and reset. As you rest beneath this understanding, allow the idea of warning to soften rather than alarm. It is not a countdown, it is an invitation. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Warning is the universe offering orientation before direction hardens into inevitability. In the end, traveller, it is all right to pause and listen. The quiet signals matter most. Tonight the universe whispers again, and within, that whisper is guidance, not demand. Attention, not fear. Balance, not collapse. The sky has never been empty. Even on nights when clouds conceal the stars, even when light erases constellations from view, the sky remains dense with motion, pressure, and memory. Above the Nile, ancient observers watched it not as a distant ceiling, but as a living archive, a slow manuscript written in cycles of light and shadow. The sky was not separate from Earth. It was Earth's larger rhythm, made visible a reminder that what unfolds below is always responding to what moves above. Traveller. When you look upward, you are looking backward in time. Light travels with delay. Every star arrives late. The sky is a collection of pasts layered together, some separated by thousands of years, some by millions. This is not poetry, it is measurement. The sky teaches patience by force of physics. Nothing you see is happening now. Everything has already happened, and yet it still influences you. Thoth's association with the sky was never about domination. He did not rule the heavens, he read them. He understood that celestial motion provided a reference frame larger than human desire. Floods aligned with lunar cycles. Seasons followed solar geometry. Calendars emerged not from imagination but from watching the sky repeat itself with slight meaningful variation. Accuracy meant survival. I have spent long nights beneath open domes, instruments humming softly, tracking objects that move with a steadiness almost indifferent to observation. Satellites drift. Stars precess. Planets trace loops that once seemed chaotic until their patience revealed order. The sky does not hurry. It does not adapt to us. It invites alignment or indifference, nothing in between. Ancient Egypt treated the sky as a teacher rather than a mystery to conquer. Temples faced specific stars not for symbolism alone but for calibration. The sky anchored time. It corrected drift. When the land shifted, the sky remained reliable enough to reveal it. Thoth's role was to mediate between these scales, translating cosmic regularity into human rhythm. In astronomy, we learn quickly that the sky resists narrative. Patterns exist, but they are not moral. Supernovae do not announce meaning. Comets do not deliver messages. And yet their predictability carries instruction. The universe behaves consistently enough to be understood, but not enough to be controlled. This balance is where wisdom lives. The sky also humbles ambition. Civilizations rise, believing themselves central only to realize they occupy a narrow window of habitability in a vast, largely indifferent cosmos. The Egyptians accepted this without despair. They did not need the universe to care about them personally. It was enough that it could be understood well enough to cooperate with. Thoth's sky is not the sky of destiny, but of proportion. It reminds humanity of scale. Human time is brief. Geological time is long. Astronomical time is immense. Confusing these scales produces error. Expecting immediate consequence from slow systems breeds frustration. Ignoring slow change invites surprise. The sky teaches patience by example. I have felt this patience erode during moments when technology promised immediacy, when models ran faster than reflection, when predictions replaced observation. The sky does not accelerate to meet expectation. It reveals itself only to those willing to wait. This is not mysticism. It is orbital mechanics. Ancient calendars were never perfect. Drift accumulated. Corrections were required. The Egyptians accepted this as natural. Precision was an ongoing task, not an achievement completed once. Thoth's authority rested here. He did not guarantee accuracy. He demanded maintenance. Watching the sky was not an act of faith. It was labor. The sky also records disruption. Impact craters mark moments when alignment failed. Radiation bursts tell stories of distant collapse. Background noise carries whispers from the universe's earliest phase. Even chaos leaves signatures. Silence, too, is data. The absence of expected signals often reveals more than their presence. Traveller the sky, you rest beneath tonight, carries all of this quietly. It does not announce danger. It does not promise safety. It persists. This persistence is comforting when understood correctly. The universe has endured conditions far harsher than those you face now and still produces moments of awareness capable of reflecting on it. Thoth's sky is not hopeful or cruel. It is consistent. It offers orientation without guarantee. In ancient judgment, Hall's hearts were weighed against a feather not because gods demanded it, but because balance was already written into reality. The sky provided the scale. Ethics mirrored physics. Excess tipped systems toward correction. Modern science sometimes forgets this mirroring. We isolate disciplines, separate sky from earth, ethics from measurement. Yet the patterns persist regardless. Climate responds to energy imbalance. Orbits respond to mass. Societies respond to incentives. The sky's lesson applies everywhere. Systems respond to pressure, not intention. I have found solace in returning to the sky during moments of uncertainty. Not for answers, but for context. Problems shrink when viewed against cosmic scale, not because they vanish, but because proportion returns. Urgency softens, thought slows, perspective widens. The Egyptians believed that souls travelled among the stars not as reward, but as continuity. Memory did not end at death. It redistributed. This belief was not escapism. It was acceptance of scale. Individual existence participates briefly in a much longer motion. Thoth recorded this participation not to judge it but to acknowledge it. Skywatching requires humility. Clouds obscure, instruments fail, predictions miss. Error accumulates, and yet pattern persists. The willingness to continue observing despite imperfection is the essence of Thoth's discipline. Knowledge grows not through certainty but through sustained attention. As you listen now, perhaps the sky feels distant, abstract, unreachable. Yet its influence is intimate. Your circadian rhythm follows its light. Your ancestors navigated by it. Your elements were forged within it. The sky is not above you. It is within you, rearranged into different form. In the end, traveller, it is all right to let the sky remain vast and unresolved. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. The sky does both without effort. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not through revelation, but through continuity. You are not lost in space. Let that thought settle gently as the sky keeps its slow vigil and sleep draws nearer. Earth does not feel ancient when touched. Soil yields easily. Stone warms beneath the sun. Water shapes itself around any hand placed within it. And yet beneath this familiarity lies a depth of time so vast that human thought struggles to hold it, without dissolving into abstraction. Earth carries memory not as story, but as structure. Every layer records pressure, absence, return. Long before humans named gods or traced constellations, the planet was already thinking in cycles. Traveller Earth is not passive matter. It responds. Stress accumulates and releases. Heat circulates. Fields shift. Life adapts or vanishes. These are not metaphors, they are mechanisms. The ground beneath your stillness tonight has been ocean floor, volcanic plain, forest bed, and frozen silence many times over. Stability is temporary, continuity is conditional. The Egyptians sensed this intuitively. The Nile was not merely a river. It was Earth speaking rhythmically, depositing memory grain by grain. Floods erased borders and restored fertility in a single motion. What looked like destruction was nourishment delayed. Thoth's presence here is not celestial, it is terrestrial. He records not only what falls from the sky, but what rises from the ground. Geology reveals Earth as a patient editor. It revises relentlessly. Mountains soften into plains, plains fracture into basins, rivers migrate, forget, and return under different names. Civilization builds atop these revisions, mistaking temporary stability for permanence. Earth allows the mistake, then corrects it slowly enough to seem merciful, quickly enough to remain unavoidable. I have stood on landscapes that appear inert until examined closely. Strata tilted just enough to betray past violence. Fossils compressed into stone like thoughts paused mid-sentence. Fault lines quiet for centuries gathering in tension. Earth rarely announces change, it prepares. Thoth's ethic applies here with precision. Record honestly. Observe patiently. Accept that correction is not hostility. Earth does not punish. It equilibrates. When systems exceed limits, feedback intervenes. This is not morality imposed from above. It is balance expressed from below. Ancient builders align their structures not only to stars, but to bedrock. They listen to ground resonance, to flood behavior, to wind direction shaped by terrain. This was not superstition. It was empirical humility. Architecture that ignored Earth failed quickly. Architecture that cooperated endured long enough to become myth. Modern engineering rediscovers this lesson repeatedly. Structures that resist natural movement fracture. Those that flex survive. The Earth favours compliance over rigidity. Thoth's wisdom echoes here quietly. Adaptation preserves memory. Resistance accelerates erasure. Earth also forgets deliberately. Erosion smooths sharpness. Sediment buries evidence. Organic matter dissolves back into chemistry. This forgetting is not negligence. It is containment. Too much memory would paralyze renewal. Too little would erase guidance. Earth maintains a balance between preservation and erasure that no archive can rival. Traveller, when you walk across ground, you traverse compressed time. Each step presses against histories that cannot be retrieved intact. This should not cause unease. It should inspire care. Your weight participates in a system far older than intention. Earth responds even to gentle pressure. The Egyptians called the underworld not a place of punishment, but of transition. The ground was where transformation completed itself. Bodies returned to soil. Structures collapsed into material. Knowledge faded into pattern. Thoth recorded this not as loss, but as continuity changing form. In modern culture, Earth is often framed as resource rather than system. Extraction accelerates, feedback lags, warning signs are reinterpreted as inconveniences, yet Earth's response remains unchanged. It adjusts regardless of narrative. Heat redistributes, water moves, life migrates or ends, memory persists beneath denial. I have watched landscapes alter subtly over decades, changes dismissed until thresholds were crossed. Coastlines retreat quietly until suddenly they do not exist. Forests thin imperceptibly until fire resets them violently. Earth does not deceive. It reveals gradually. Attention determines outcome. Thoth's silence grows heavy here, not as accusation, but as record. Each ignored signal adds context to future correction. Memory accumulates whether acknowledged or not. Earth does not forget imbalance, it metabolizes it. There is a strange comfort in this inevitability. It removes the burden of control. Humans do not manage Earth. They negotiate with it. Cooperation yields longevity. Defiance yields instruction. Neither is personal. Both are instructive. The planet has survived conditions far beyond human imagination. Frozen epochs, hothouse intervals, impacts that sterilize surfaces, and yet life returned each time, altered but persistent. Earth's intelligence is not conscious. It is systemic. Thoth's role is to ensure that intelligence is legible long enough for awareness to respond. As you rest, now consider the weight beneath you, not as pressure, but as support. Earth holds without demanding explanation. It has done so through countless cycles. Your presence is brief but not insignificant. Even small interactions ripple outward through systems sensitive to disturbance. In ancient texts, earth and sky were never separate. What fell from above altered what rose from below. Balance existed between them. Thoth mediated this exchange not to dominate either, but to maintain proportion. When either side overwhelmed the other, correction followed. Modern science isolates disciplines, yet Earth ignores these divisions. Climate couples sky and ground seamlessly. Biology binds chemistry and physics without apology. Earth teaches integration by force of reality. Thoth's wisdom lives here as insistence on wholeness. Traveller, you're not burdening the planet by resting. You're participating in its rhythm. Breath exchanges with atmosphere. Heat dissipates into ground. Thought slows as nervous systems entrain with darkness. Earth receives and returns without judgment. In the end, it is all right to trust the ground to carry more than you can. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Earth does both quietly, endlessly. Tonight the universe whispers again, not from above but from beneath, reminding you that balance does not require mastery and only attention. Let that understanding settle as deeply as the roots beneath ancient stone, and allow sleep to arrive gently supported by a planet that has been holding long before memory learned how to speak. Return is not reversal. Nothing comes back unchanged, and nothing truly leaves without leaving something behind. Return is the motion of systems finding familiarity within difference of cycles, closing just enough to be recognized before opening again. Along the Nile, each flood was called a return, though no flood ever matched the last. The water carried new silt, new temperature, new timing, yet it still answered an ancient expectation. The Egyptians understood that return was continuity refined, not repetition preserved. Traveller return occurs quietly. It does not announce itself with certainty. It appears as resonance of feeling, that something aligns again after long drift. In science, we observe this when models regain coherence after revision, when theories once discarded reappear in simplified form, when old questions become relevant under new conditions. Knowledge does not progress in straight lines. It spirals, revisiting old ground from altered altitude. Thoth inhabits this spiral. He doesn't move forward or backward, he moves through. When civilizations forget, he withdraws. When attention reawakens, he returns, not as deity but as posture. Accuracy resurfaces. Ethics reconnect with inquiry. Observation regains patience. The name changes. The function persists. I have felt return during moments when abandoned ideas resurfaced unexpectedly, not because they were correct before, but because conditions had changed enough to make them useful again. A method once too slow becomes necessary. A discarded caution becomes essential. Return is never nostalgia. It is recognition without sentimentality. The Egyptians encoded return into their understanding of the afterlife. Death was not an end, but a transition that allowed balance to be restored. What returned was not the body, but the pattern that body once carried. Memory-character alignment. Thoth recorded these transitions not to judge them, but to ensure continuity of principle across transformation. In geological time, continents return toward familiar configurations through different paths. Supercontinents form fracture and reassemble with altered edges, climate states oscillate between extremes without replicating conditions exactly. Earth remembers constraints even as it forgets forms. Return operates within boundaries defined by physics, not desire. Modern civilization experiences return differently. Lost knowledge resurfaces through rediscovery rather than inheritance. Ancient scripts are decoded, ruins reinterpreted. Methods once dismissed regain relevance under new pressures. Return here is not recovery of past greatness. It is re-entry into unresolved questions. Thoth's return is most visible in moments when science and ethics reapproach one another after separation, when knowledge advances far enough to require restraint again, when power forces reflection, when speed demands slowness. These are not regressions, they are corrections. I've noticed this return in long nights spent recalibrating instruments after drift. Rendered earlier data unreliable. The process feels tedious until clarity emerges. Familiar procedures regain meaning. Precision returns not because it was lost forever, but because it was temporarily neglected. Return restores proportion. The danger of return lies in misidentification. Romanticizing the past distorts its function. The Egyptians warned against this through ritual renewal rather than preservation. They did not attempt to freeze time, they refreshed alignment. Return required effort, not longing. Thoth's wisdom emphasizes this distinction. He does not restore old structures, he restores balance. When balance returns, new forms emerge that resemble old ones only superficially. Function matters more than appearance. Method matters more than myth. In personal experience, return often feels like relief. Exhaustion fades when rhythms re-establish themselves. Sleep returns when vigilance loosens. Curiosity returns when pressure subsides. These returns are not earned through force. They arrive when resistance softens. The universe models this endlessly. After turbulent systems dampen. After excitation, energy redistributes. After expansion, contraction follows. None of this implies intention. It implies constraint. Return is how constrained systems explore possibility without losing coherence. Traveller. This return is already happening within you. Breath slows. Muscles release unnecessary tension. Thought circles back to simpler questions. What matters? What can wait? What aligns? Sleep is itself a return not to unconsciousness, but to a baseline state where repair occurs without oversight. Thoth's presence here is gentle. He does not demand attention. He observes whether return is permitted. When systems refuse to rest, correction intensifies. When rest is allowed, renewal proceeds quietly. Return prevents accumulation of error by dissolving excess. In ancient Egypt, festivals marked returns not because they celebrated the past, but because they acknowledged successful recalibration. Order had been restored. Balance reasserted, time could continue without fracture. These moments were not triumphant, they were calm. Modern culture often resists return, mistaking it for stagnation. Progress becomes addiction, acceleration replaces direction, yet without return systems exhaust themselves. Thoth's lesson persists here unchanged. Motion without reflection destabilizes. I have learned to trust return after periods of uncertainty. When understanding dissolves, temporarily patience allows it to reform with fewer assumptions. The return is never identical. It carries the imprint of what was learned during absence. This makes it stronger, not weaker. Earth returns after fire with altered composition. Forests re-emerge differently structured. Species distributions shift. Yet ecosystems stabilize again. The return is not restoration. It is adaptation informed by loss. Thoth records these returns not to archive them, but to ensure continuity of pattern. He does not preserve artifacts, he preserves intelligibility. When intelligibility returns, meaning follows without effort. As you rest, now allow return to unfold without supervision. You do not need to manage it. Systems older than awareness handle it reliably. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Return arrives when conditions permit. In the end, traveller, it is all right to trust the cycle. What withdraws can reappear in quieter form. What fades can reassert itself through alignment rather than force. Tonight the universe whispers again, not of beginnings or endings, but of return as reassurance. Let sleep carry you into that gentle loop, knowing that nothing essential is lost when balance is allowed to come home. Reflection is not the act of looking backward. It is the quiet recalibration that occurs when motion slows enough for meaning to surface. Long after events pass, after structures rise and fall, after names dissolve into sediment, reflection remains as a subtle pressure shaping what follows. Along the Nile, reflection took place at dusk when the heat released its grip, and water mirrored sky without distortion. This was not nostalgia. It was alignment restored through stillness. Traveller reflection is how intelligence conserves energy. Systems that never reflect repeat error until correction arrives violently. Systems that pause to reflect adjust gently. In science, reflection appears as peer review, replication, revision. In nature, it appears as dormancy, migration, seasonal withdrawal. In consciousness, it appears as rest. Thoth embodies reflection without attachment. He records without clinging, observes without interference. His role is not to preserve moments, but to ensure they can be understood later if conditions permit. Reflection transforms experience into guidance. Without it, accumulation overwhelms. I have felt reflection arrive during long nights when instruments were powered down and data left untouched. At first this felt irresponsible. Later patterns emerged that had been invisible amid constant activity. Reflection does not add information. It subtracts noise. What remains is structure. Ancient Egypt treated reflection as necessity, not luxury. Judgment rituals were not condemnations. They were moments of alignment. The heart was weighed not against expectation, but against balance itself. Reflection measured resonance between intention and outcome. When misalignment appeared, correction followed quietly. In modern life, reflection is often postponed indefinitely. Speed is rewarded. Pause is mistaken for inefficiency. Yet systems without reflection drift faster toward instability. Feedback ignored accumulates. Correction arrives later, harsher, less negotiable. Thoth's reflection is gentle because it arrives early. He notices slight deviations and allows awareness to respond before force intervenes. Reflection preserves choice. Without it, systems surrender agency to inertia. Geologically, reflection occurs when erosion slows and sediment settles. Landscapes reorganize without dramatic upheaval. Biologically, reflection appears as sleep when neural patterns consolidate and unnecessary signals dissolve. Without sleep, cognition fractures. Reflection is biological necessity scaled upward. Traveller, as you listen, your own reflection deepens. Thought slows. Sensation softens. Memory integrates. You are not losing awareness. You are reorganizing it. Reflection prepares systems for what comes next without requiring prediction. The Egyptians believed reflection connected worlds. The living reflected on actions to align with cosmic order. The dead reflected to re-enter balance. Reflection bridged states without violence. Thoth recorded transitions not to judge them but to maintain continuity of meaning. In scientific inquiry, reflection often arrives after failure. Hypotheses collapse. Models break. Reflection transforms collapse into insight. Without reflection, failure repeats as chaos. With reflection, it becomes instruction. I have learned to respect reflection most when it resisted articulation, when conclusions felt premature, when uncertainty lingered. Reflection tolerates ambiguity longer than ambition prefers. This tolerance protects systems from brittle certainty. Thoth's reflection counters dogma. Fixed belief resists revision. Reflection invites adaptation. In this way, Thoth is less a god of answers than a guardian of questions. Questions remain viable longer than answers. They survive resets. Reflection also carries responsibility. Seeing clearly increases obligation to respond appropriately. Knowledge without reflection accelerates harm. Reflection without action stagnates. Balance lies between awareness and response. As civilizations progressed, reflection diminished. Ritual became performance. Measurement became assumption. Ethics separated from inquiry. Reflection retreated, waiting for imbalance to force its return. Thoth withdrew not out of absence but patience. Modern science reintroduces reflection through uncertainty principles, error margins, confidence intervals. These are not weaknesses. They are reflections encoded into method. They remind practitioners that perception is limited, that interpretation requires humility. Traveller reflection asks nothing dramatic of you tonight. It does not demand resolution. It does not insist on understanding. It invites stillness sufficient for alignment to occur naturally. Systems older than awareness handle correction quietly. As reflection deepens, fear dissolves. Not because threats vanish, but because proportion returns. You occupy a moment within a vast continuity. Your errors are not final. Your insights are not isolated. Reflection integrates both gently. Thoth's reflection persists wherever memory remains flexible. He records without freezing, observes without owning. Reflection allows wisdom to outlast civilization without becoming rigid. In the end, traveller, it is all right to let reflection complete its work without supervision. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Reflection listens to both without urgency. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with instruction, but with patience. Let sleep receive what reflection has prepared. Knowing that alignment continues even when awareness drifts into quiet darkness. Descent does not mean falling. It means yielding to gravity without resistance, allowing systems to settle where effort is no longer required. Night accomplishes this naturally. Temperature drops, light withdraws, activity slows. Along the Nile, descent arrived not with darkness alone, but with a soft reorganization of attention as if the land itself exhaled. Work ended not because it was forbidden, but because the world signaled that continuation would introduce error. The Egyptians listened. Descent was a form of intelligence. Traveller sleep is the most ancient descent practiced by complex systems. Long before consciousness named it, biology refined it. Neurons synchronize, memory consolidates, waste clears. Sleep is not absence, it is maintenance carried out beneath awareness. Systems that resist sleep do not gain productivity, they accumulate distortion. Correction then arrives through collapse rather than rest. Thoth's presence becomes almost imperceptible here. He does not guide descent, he allows it. Recording ceases not because observation ends, but because observation becomes internal. During sleep, the mind replays fragments without narrative pressure. Patterns integrate without demand for explanation. This is not inefficiency, it is repair. I have learned this through nights spent resisting rest, believing clarity would arrive through persistence. It never did. Only when attention loosened did understanding reorganize itself. Solutions appeared unannounced. Errors corrected themselves quietly. Descent accomplished what effort could not. Ancient cultures treated descent with reverence. The underworld was not feared. It was respected as a necessary phase. The sun descended not to die, but to travel unseen, recalibrating its path for return. Sleep mirrored this cosmic movement. Consciousness withdrew not to vanish but to restore alignment. Modern society often resists descent. Artificial light extends activity. Stimulation replaces stillness. Rest becomes optional. Yet systems respond the same way they always have. Distortion accumulates. Attention fragments. Memory degrades. Eventually force replaces choice. Descent arrives as exhaustion. Thoth's ethic counters this quietly. He does not command rest. He records its absence. Consequence follows naturally. Descent offered voluntarily is gentle. Descent imposed by collapse is harsh. The difference is timing, not morality. In neuroscience, descent into sleep is marked by synchronized oscillations, waves of activity that coordinate repair. These rhythms are ancient. They appear across species. Sleep predates narrative consciousness. It is deeper than culture. Thoth's wisdom aligns here not as myth but as recognition that intelligence requires intervals of unknowing. Traveller, as your body rests, systems far older than identity take over. Breath deepens without instruction. Muscles release unnecessary tension. Sensory input diminishes. This is not loss of control. It is delegation to processes that evolved precisely for this task. The Egyptians believed that during sleep the soul wandered freely not as escape but as recalibration. Dreams were not prophecy. They were reorganization. Fragments recombined without constraint. Thoth's role in dreams was subtle. He did not send messages. He ensured continuity between waking and rest so meaning could return intact. I have observed this continuity when ideas formed during sleep retained coherence upon waking despite lacking conscious assembly. The mind worked without supervision. Descent allowed complexity to resolve into simplicity. This is not mystical. It is emergent behavior in self-organizing systems. Descent also reduces fear. Vigilance relaxes. Threat assessment quiets. This does not increase danger, it restores proportion. Systems that never descend remain perpetually alarmed. They misinterpret noise as signal. Sleep recalibrates thresholds. Earth participates in descent nightly. Temperature gradients smooth. Atmospheric turbulence diminishes. Nocturnal cycles stabilize ecosystems stressed by daytime intensity. Even the planet rests in its way, redistributing energy accumulated during solar exposure. Thoth records this not because it is remarkable, but because it is reliable. Descent works. It has always worked. It does not require belief, only allowance. Traveller, you do not need to solve anything before descending. Understanding does not precede rest. It follows it. Systems that insist on resolution before sleep misunderstand order. Rest prepares resolution. It does not require it. In ancient judgment, myth's descent preceded renewal. The heart weighed not to condemn but to release imbalance. Sleep performs a similar function biologically. Excess emotional charge dissipates. Memory integrates. Perspective resets. You wake changed not because something new was added, but because excess was removed. I find comfort in this removal. Sleep erases urgency without erasing importance. It allows significance to remain while shedding distortion. This is Thoth's gentlest correction. No intervention, no announcement, just quiet adjustment. As descent deepens, thought loses sharp edges. Sentences soften. Meaning remains without structure. This is not confusion. It is compression. Information condenses into intuition. Tomorrow it may expand again if needed. Tonight it rests. The universe models descent constantly. After expansion, contraction. After excitation, damping. After noise, silence. These are not failures. They are restorations. Thoth's lesson here is simple and difficult. Trust the descent. Traveller, if any anxiety lingers, allow it to drift without engagement. Descent does not require permission from thought. It proceeds regardless. Resistance only delays comfort. Yielding accelerates balance. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Descent allows both to continue without demand. You do not need to carry them consciously. Systems older than awareness handle them reliably. In the end, it is all right to let go without knowing what will be resolved. Sleep is not abandonment. It is participation in a cycle that has sustained intelligence long before it learned to narrate itself. Tonight the universe whispers again, not as instruction, but as gravity drawing you gently inward. Let the pull carry you downward softly, steadily, until awareness thins into rest, and the record continues without effort. Final does not mean ending. It means settling into a state where motion no longer needs direction. In deep systems, the final phase is rarely dramatic. It arrives as quiet coherence when competing signals diminish, and only what is essential continues to move. Along the Nile, the final hours before dawn carried this quality. Not yet morning, no longer night. The world rested in a balance that required no effort to maintain. The Egyptians recognized this interval as sacred, not because something happened, but because nothing needed to. Traveller, the idea of a final state often carries fear, as if stillness implied erasure. Yet in physics, final states are not voids. They are configurations of minimal tension arrangements where forces cancel cleanly, and energy no longer rushes outward. Entropy increases not as chaos alone, but as redistribution toward equilibrium. The universe does not rush toward silence. It eases into it. Thoth's presence here is almost imperceptible because there is little left to correct. Recording continues, but without urgency. Observation persists without expectation. The scribe no longer writes events. He records condition. Balance achieved. Motion slowed. Attention released. I have encountered this finality in moments when long inquiry resolved not into answers but into acceptance. When the need to conclude dissolved. When understanding stopped demanding language. These moments did not feel empty. They felt complete in a way explanation never achieved. The search ended not because everything was known, but because enough was aligned. Ancient Egyptian myth framed this state not as reward, but as readiness. The soul that reached balance did not ascend triumphantly. It integrated quietly. It became light enough to pass without resistance. The heart weighed against the feather was not judged. It was measured for resonance. Finality arrived when resonance held. In modern terms, this resembles systems reaching steady state. Inputs equal outputs. Feedback stabilizes. Correction is no longer required because drift has ceased. This is rare and temporary, but when it occurs, it brings rest deeper than sleep. It is not unconsciousness. It is coherence. Traveller, as you rest now, your body approaches such a state naturally. Breath finds rhythm without instruction. Muscles release tension no longer necessary. Neural activity synchronizes into slow waves that conserve energy. Nothing is demanded. Nothing is missing. The system functions because it is allowed to. Thoth's final lesson was never about knowledge accumulation. It was about knowing when to stop accumulating. Excess understanding becomes noise. Excess memory becomes burden. Excess vigilance becomes distortion. Finality is subtraction without loss. I have learned this reluctantly through exhaustion, through nights when thinking persisted long after usefulness expired. Only when attention released did resolution occur. Finality arrived not as collapse, but as relief. The universe models this endlessly. Stars burn until fuel depletes, then settle into quieter states. Galaxies slow their expansion, locally forming stable clusters amid a larger motion. Even the cosmos approaches thermal equilibrium on timescales beyond imagination. Finality is not disappearance. It is redistribution towards stillness. Thoth does not resist this. He records it as continuity fulfilled. His role as eternal scribe ends not because he stops writing, but because there is nothing left that requires annotation. Balance speaks for itself. In human terms, finality often appears frightening because it removes striving. Without striving, identity feels threatened. Yet identity built on striving was always provisional. When striving dissolves, what remains is presence. Presence does not need justification. Traveller presence is enough. You do not need to become wiser tonight. You do not need to understand the cosmos history or yourself more deeply before resting. Finality does not demand completion of tasks. It arrives when resistance fades. The Egyptians understood this through ritual silence. At certain moments, speech ceased entirely. No prayers, no chants, just stillness. This was not emptiness. It was recognition that the system had aligned sufficiently to continue without intervention. Modern culture struggles with this stillness. Silence feels unproductive. Rest feels indulgent. Yet systems that never enter final states accumulate instability until collapse forces stillness violently. Thoth's wisdom remains unchanged here. Enter stillness voluntarily or be corrected into it. As your awareness thins, thought may drift without sequence. Images may arise without context. This is not disorder. It is narrative releasing its hold. Meaning does not vanish. It compresses into sensation. The body understands finality before the mind does. Earth participates in this finality nightly. After heat dissipates, ground temperatures stabilize. After turbulence fades, air layers settle. After activity ceases, ecosystems rest. This rest is not passive. It prepares tomorrow's motion. Sky participates as well. Stellar motion continues, but locally nothing urgent changes. Orbits remain stable. Radiation flows steadily. The cosmos does not hurry toward conclusion. It relaxes into continuation. Thoth's final presence is this relaxation. He does not watch anxiously. He does not anticipate correction. He observes equilibrium holding. The record continues, but lightly without weight. Traveller, if any lingering thought insists on resolution, let it drift unanswered. Finality does not require closure. Closure implies separation. Finality implies integration. You are not ending your attention. You are allowing it to dissolve into the system it has always belonged to. Some mysteries wait, others watch. In finality, both become irrelevant. Not because they are solved, but because they no longer disturb balance. Curiosity rests without extinguishing itself. Awareness remains without effort. In ancient belief, the final state was described as joining the field of stars not as escape, but as participation. Individual boundaries softened, identity diffused into pattern. This was not loss. It was expansion without motion. Modern physics echoes this metaphorically. Particles are not isolated. Fields underlie them. What appears separate is interaction stabilized temporarily. Finality is returned to field-like existence where distinction matters less than coherence. As sleep deepens, you approach this state naturally. Conscious boundaries soften. Time loses sequence. Sensation fades into uniform warmth. This is not falling, it is settling. Thoth does not accompany you here because accompaniment is no longer necessary. The system knows how to hold itself. Recording continues without awareness. Memory integrates without supervision. In the end, traveller, there is nothing left to do, nothing left to understand, nothing left to anticipate. Finality is not darkness. It is quiet light evenly distributed. The universe whispers no longer because it does not need to. Everything that needed to be said has already been encoded into rhythm pattern and rest. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the edge of tonight's story, traveller, where the echoes grow softer and the light withdraws without urgency. What we followed was never meant to resolve into certainty, only to pass through forgotten halls of time, where memory clings to stone and silence carries more meaning than words ever could. The universe does not close its stories. It leaves them unfinished, layered waiting. Civilizations rise, languages fade, stars drift. Yet the patterns continue repeating with quiet patience. Somewhere between what was recorded and what was forgotten, understanding still moves slowly like gravity shaping unseen paths. There is no need to feel small here, observer. Smallness is not absence, it is participation. Every atom that listens, every mind that wonders belongs to the same unfolding order. Entropy scatters, but memory persists. Time erodes, yet meaning lingers. Some truths do not demand answers, only presence. As the dust settles and the chronicle closes, remember that silence is not empty. It is the universe thinking. What remains unspoken tonight continues elsewhere, in the turning of the moon, in the steady return of seasons, in the quiet moments when attention replaces certainty. Rest now, listener. Let the questions loosen their grip. The past is not finished, and the cosmos has not gone silent. It simply waits recording patiently as it always has. Sleep well, traveller. The universe will keep watch.